co-counsel at Namaste Solar, as well as a former board member at COSIA, which is the Colorado Solar Energy Industry Association, and a professor over at the Colorado State University GSSE program. So without further ado, Jason.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? I'm getting over a cold and I might either be muffled or muted or bumbling, any of the above. So I'm going to take you on a tour. I'm going to make solar as sexy and interesting a subject as it can possibly be. We're going to board a spaceship. We're going to go up into outer space. We're going to join on with the International Space Station. And we're going to do a very fast 17-minute fly around the Earth and take an extremely high-level view of where the industry is and where we're going. And we can only do that going up as high as the International Space Station. And to get us there, we've got beer and lots of animation. We're going to cover the state of solar. We're going to use numbers, which are not my language, but I'm going to present some numbers on the state of solar internationally, where we are in the U.S. relative to our competitors abroad. We're going to look at the state of solar in Colorado relative to markets around the country. We're going to touch on a few of the current issues and trends facing solar in Colorado and some issues that are part of a broader narrative. And I'm going to make some bold projections for the future. Hopefully by that point the video runs out and you can't hold me to any of the predictions I make. And I encourage you to jot down your most difficult questions afterward. I'll jet out of the building and I'll bring someone else up to answer them. So as Peter said, I am the principal and an attorney at my own practice. I'm also the general counsel at Namaste Solar, where I've been the only general counsel for 5 years. I'm a former board president and board member of COSIA and currently an advisor. And another round of applause, please. The GSSE program. I wear lots of hats. So a few themes to keep in mind for tonight as I take you on this journey and fly rapidly around the Earth. You'll probably all have your heads spinning by the end. I know I will. So a few things I wanted to prompt you to think about as we talk about the state of solar PV. This has been said numerous times, whatever news outlet you read, New York Times, Green Tech Media, Solar Pro, Renewable Energy World. Solar PV truly is a disruptive technology. In many, many respects, we'll hopefully unpack some of the layers of the disruptive force that solar PV presents. Unfortunately, there's not enough time to go into thermal concentrated PV, so we're going to focus on solar PV and in particular distributed generation. Those power plants on your roof, the roof of your business, the roof of the university, hopefully soon. There is a role for central solar PV, though that's not my area of expertise, so we can take tangents to discuss that if you're all interested. I want you to think about the tension between central power plants and central power structures and decentralized power plants and decentralized power structures. That is, one entity, the monopolized utility that owns the generators, the poles and wires, the delivery system, and the bill to you, the customer, versus solar PV power plants, thousands of them, all tied into individual meters with individual financing solutions and individual motivations for going solar. I want you to think about the notion of a regulated monopoly utility. That is, a business that exists and answers only to the state regulators and in exchange gets a guaranteed rate of return. If I could start a business and be told by a governmental entity that I was guaranteed a 10% rate of return for taking risk, I'd be there in a second. Think about that as a contrast to the competitive energy services sectors, those companies that are selling with competition based on market forces. There are supply chain issues, there's supply issues, there's labor issues, and it's all competitive. We have to win your business. I want you to think about the notion of we, the ratepayers, as the tenants of an electricity generation system and how that contrasts with a system of self-owned customer-sited generators. And then lastly, the notion that utilities have, for the last 110, 120 years, been based on a volume-based revenue model. That is, the more of the product they sell to you, the more they make. The poles and wires and all the capital assets, they get a little bit of that back every month in the energy connection fee, but most of what we pay for are volumetric charges on a per kilowatt hour basis. So the more that they sell to you, the more you pay. Think about the old days when we had landline phones, and the more minutes you spoke, the more the company charged you and the more money they made. Well, it wasn't too long ago, that stuff went by the wayside. We all now have unlimited minutes, unlimited data, and we're all a lot happier. I think. So I don't know if you can all see this from where you're sitting, but the animations will tell you where to look. Germany has long been lauded as the marquee solar market in the world. It grew rapidly, it came online earliest, and it has a lot to teach the rest of the world about how to install solar cheaply. But it came on hot, and it's now on the decline. Similarly, in typical Italian fashion, I only say that because I'm part Italian, it was in vogue for a while. The government set an extremely high feed-in tariff rate, went white hot. There were a number of systems that got contracts for long-term fit contracts that never got built. Well, no surprise, the Italian fit market has collapsed. Look at where we're going. The US is on the upswing. Look at that curve. That is beautiful. Steady growth and projected to grow into the future. We see Japan with steady growth. And what happened in or around, 2011? Fukushima. Yeah. Japan decides as a matter of national policy that it cannot afford the risks associated with central nuclear power plants, and they triple down on their investment in solar. And that spike is the beginning of a much larger spike that we're going to see in the coming years as Japan seeks to decommission their nuclear facilities and ramp up renewables in a big way. And then, of course, China is coming online in a major way, and they're presenting their own suite of disruptive forces in the market. Some say the reason for this demand growth is a function of their oversupply, their over-subsidization of module production and module technology. They need a place for all that capacity to go, and so the government has now gotten in the business of supporting the demand for solar. Here's another representation of the same graph. This one is looking at the 2013 annual growth rates. Again, the animation will draw your attention to where we are in the United States. You can see that Germany and Italy have retreated from the lead that they experienced in 2009, 2010. We, the US, we're ahead of zero, but we're not anywhere near the white hot growth rates of Japan or China. That may be healthy. I think it's a pretty good place for us to be based on our current market size and where we're projected to go and where we're and how fast we're going to get there. Turning inward, now the International Space Station is going to take a little bit of a pause over the US, and we're going to look down and focus on the regional markets for solar PV in the US. This is a patchwork. We have not had until recently, and we still don't have, a central energy policy that can promote solar or any other clean tech in any sort of cohesive way. And so what we're left with is a patchwork of policies that you may be aware of. California, of course, is the leading horse in the race. They got in first, they got in big, and they have continued to grow and outpace the rest of the market. They probably are a larger market than all of the other markets in the US combined. Arizona also has been a steadily growing large market. It's in some segments started to stagnate and trail off. There's been some recent controversy about the regulatory policy in Arizona. What we see on the East Coast is some recent growth. Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York. New Jersey started to come online in a big way sooner than New York. New York has now stated one of the most bold ambitions for solar development in the country. They're looking at something like 5 gigawatts of solar in the next 10 to 15 years. But what you can see here is that Colorado is barely a blip on the map. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is something to take stock in. We're a fairly small market relative to the rest of the country. But what we are, I would submit, is very balanced. We have a healthy balance of utility scale central solar, distributed residential solar, and distributed commercial solar on top of businesses and light industry. That's where we are, right in the sweet spot. If I had another map to show you the solar insolation resources, there's this beautiful solar thermal map that shows Colorado to be the epicenter of the capacity for solar thermal generation. Well, PV is not that different. That epicenter happens to be somewhere in Nevada, Arizona, high elevation, clean air, lots of sunny days. We should be bigger than we are. Yes?
So why is New York going so hot when they seem like one of the worst areas to put solar?
We'll be getting into what some of the differentiating factors are, why New York's policy is so ambitious. One is chock full of money. They went at it from a finance angle. We'll be touching on that. They're a deregulated generation market, so it's very, very different than Colorado, which is 100% underegulated, meaning that a utility in Colorado, Xcel Energy, can own the generation, the transmission and distribution. They can own almost everything in the supply chain. They don't happen to own the coal and natural gas, but they own everything else. And that's very different than in New York or California. What I want you to take away from this graph is simply the rate of growth. Solar is becoming a larger piece of the pie. This fits into a broader picture about the declining place for coal in the fuel mix, nationally and in particular the state of Colorado. We are a very coal-dependent state, and that will be shifting rapidly, partly because natural gas prices are so low, so a lot of coal plants have retrofitted to natural gas. Natural gas prices are low, that becomes the favored generation source. And then the health of the state policy in Colorado, the Renewable Energy Standard, has thrust wind and solar up in what it's producing.
I have a question real quickly.
Yeah.
So if China is really going heavy with solar really recently, all we've heard in the media recently is how much the United States is depending on exporting their coal to China, and how heavy China will continue to use coal and grow that industry. How does that balance out?
I don't have the statistics on coal. One of the trends that's possible is there'll be a short-term blip in demand, foreign demand for U.S. coal. No one thinks that can sustain the current production of coal. Coal reserves are past peak and are at some of the lowest levels that they've been in the last 15, 20 years. There was a recent Denver Post editorial by a friend, Leslie Glustrom, opining that we're past peak coal, and the cost to extract the coal that's still in the ground, especially in states like Colorado, will cost 2-3 factors more than it has historically cost. So even if we have a market to sell into in China, there's transportation cost, and then there's the growth of policies that disfavor carbon-intensive fuel sources. This graph, not my favorite. What it shows is the decline associated with the growth in demand for solar. This graph shows the declining price, the retail price for solar. We've seen roughly 50% cost reductions in the last 5 years in Colorado. Colorado has some of the cheapest average selling prices for a residential solar PV system in the country. That is most likely attributed to our extremely low average retail electricity prices. Not necessarily because we are more competitive than in other states, though that could be a factor, or that our permitting costs are any lower than anywhere else, though that could be a factor. It's primarily driven by our average retail electricity rates. A recent study done by the Solar Foundation shows the correlation of the demand for solar, the size and growth and health of the solar industry, and the translation into economic development and jobs. This is an illustration of where Xcel Energy is and how they rank relative to other utilities. This presents somewhat of a false reality because this graph doesn't take into account projections for growth under Senate Bill 252, which ramped up the requirements for solar, wind, renewables for municipally owned utilities and rural electric associations. But it does tell you the story that most clean tech and solar PV capacity has been installed in Excel territory, and that's a function of the renewable energy standard that set a 30% goal by 2020. The rest of you, especially Fort Collins, has a long way to go. You probably can't read this either, so I've taken the guesswork out for you. 327 solar companies in Colorado employing a total of 3,600 individuals. I see a gentleman with the Solar City shirt on, and I'm with Namaste Solar. Another colleague is here. These are real people. These are members of our community, and these are important jobs. And we have collectively installed 56 megawatts of capacity. We've fallen in the ranks, but we're still in the top 10. So if you haven't decided to go solar, now's the time. Help to keep us in the top 10. The estimate is that in 2013, $233 million was invested in Colorado to install solar. Not an insignificant number when you consider the declines in other industries. We were one of the only sources of job growth in Colorado during the Great Recession. We were the only industry in the state of Colorado to increase the number of jobs during the Great Recession. That can't be repeated enough. And importantly for consumers, prices have fallen 10% in the last year. What does all this data mean? Again, numbers are not my friend. I am a student of words. So now we're going to start to boil all this down into what the trends are, what's actually happening around the country in different solar markets. Renewable energy standards have been around for the better part of 15 years, California being the first. Colorado's was adopted Amendment 37 in 2004 that translated into the investor-owned utility market in Excel territory in 2006. Since virtually day one, Piesco, Excel Energy, has exceeded the compliance requirements under every iteration of the renewable energy standard. What was required of Excel to purchase and put on their grid, they have gone above and beyond almost since the beginning. That is in part a credit to Excel Energy. It's also to the greater credit of the industry that's brought prices down and that's remained competitive, and to the regulators that have allowed overcompliance situations to occur. But what that's led to is we're stagnating. The market here, there's no incentive to push solar growth faster. We're consistently beyond compliance, and the regulators are getting tired of having us come back and say that we're not doing enough fast enough, when by all the official metrics, we're ahead of target. So most recently, in 2012, Senate Bill 252 was signed into law that expanded the renewable energy standard for your home utility, Fort Collins Utility, the rural electric associations in the rural part of the state. It increased that target to, I believe, 20% by 2020 with some interim goals starting in 2017. Because we've been over compliant, that's caused the market in Excel territory to start and stop. The market has shut down periodically since 2011. I was one of the people sitting at the negotiating table wrangling with the executives at Excel Energy to reopen the program. Sales couldn't take place. Customers that were asking to go solar couldn't go solar, and we were at a standstill for 3 months. Namaste Solar laid off about 12 to 15 co-owners of the company, people who had been there since the early days. We lost a lot of companies and a lot of jobs. Since then, the program has started and stopped 2 or 3 additional times, and every time the industry has to come begging for a settlement. We have to whine to the regulators that in order to preserve the activity, the market that we've so carefully grown over the years, we have to settle with the utility. That's no way for policy to take shape, to have 2 desperate parties sitting in closed-door meetings agreeing on what is possible and affordable for you all to buy and put on your roof.
Excuse that indicates to me that if Excel is over-compliant and wants to stop the program temporarily, that they're not making a profit on it. Is that the case?
We'll get there. No, they're not.
Oh.
They're not making a profit. That's one of the fundamental. It's one of the fundamental disruptive facets of solar. Is it's the one part of their value chain that they cannot capture.
Because this is against the centralized model that they depend on.
Yeah, cut and dry. You put a solar system on your roof. Those 400 to 500 kilowatt hours that you would have bought from them, you're now generating based on your own investment, and anything extra you generate back to the grid. But you're not buying what they have to sell. That's the way they make their money. That's the way they pay back their investments. When that doesn't happen, they get angry. Their shareholders start to get angry. And we're going to get into how that picture unfolds. We're starting to see the proliferation of community solar gardens. These are shared solar assets that can be parsed out and sold to individuals for whom rooftop solar is not either a feasible option or a desirable option. Either you've got shaded roof, or you're a tenant and your landlord, for any reason, decides they don't want to put solar up. These solar gardens are a way for people to participate and buy clean energy without having to put solar on their roof. Recently, Fort Collins announced its first ever utility-sponsored solar garden, 500 kilowatt project being done with Clean Energy Collective. For that, you should all be applauded. That's really fantastic. Is anyone planning to subscribe? We're going to need a few more of you in order to fill that up. 500 kilowatts, that's about 100 of you. All right.
I'm going to subscribe to Poudre Valley REA.
All right. Good. Good. And in this last year, Xcel Energy, in their electric resource plan, this is when they go to the regulators and they say, this is how much generation capacity we think we need, planning forward 5 years. This is where we think we need to get it from. And they start to factor in assumptions about fuel cost and any additional generation capacity. In that ERP, Xcel Energy proposed adding 170 megawatts of utility scale solar. And guess what? It came in as one of the least cost energy sources. Least cost. That means that new utility scale solar is as cheap or cheaper than what it could replace, be it natural gas or coal. Utility scale solar, a new solar plant, is cheaper to construct than a new coal plant by leaps and bounds, a new natural gas plant, and is comparable to new wind. That means those big solar facilities that you see growing in California and elsewhere will be the source, the go-to source for new generation capacity in the country. In fact, solar accounts for the largest percentage of all new generation capacity added in the United States. Now, 2013 was the first year for that. All new capacity added in the US, which isn't much, we're not experiencing load growth in a whole lot of areas, solar accounted for the largest share. Some other really interesting trends, these go in order, I think, of increasing interest, is the idea that Boulder might get a divorce from the utility that serves it. It's been fascinating to be a part of. I was on one of the campaign efforts to get 2B, 2C passed. I've given presentations, testimony to Boulder City Council. This is going to happen. And you can tell how scared this makes the utility by every litigation filing they make. They just sued the city of Boulder in district court, alleging that the city's ordinance to adopt a municipal utility was unauthorized. They are trying to put the brakes on at the Public Utilities Commission. They've had all these scare ads on TV. This has been no holds barred. They pumped a lot of money into this. But if it happens, this could potentially be the tipping point. This is a progressive community that, in fact, is looking at Fort Collins as its model. This could be a utility that says, Xcel, you're doing a lot, but it's not enough. We're going to seize control with eminent domain and take control of our energy destiny. And some of the projections, they're looking at 80% renewables by 2030, 2040. They're looking at 100% renewable scenarios beyond that. And they all have to do it with comparable rates. One of the covenants in the ballot initiative was that they can't flip a switch and start a municipal utility unless the rates are the same or lower than what they would have been with Xcel Energy. And the model suggests it can happen. We're starting to see in places with really high solar PV penetration, Hawaii, parts of California, studies as to how solar PV in different areas of the grid impacts the grid. What does it do to grid stability? What does it do to voltage regularity? What does it do to grid frequency? What are the costs to the system? What are the benefits to the system? And in Hawaii, there are stories that on certain feeder lines, new solar applications that go into the utility require $2,000–$3,000 interconnection studies to show that no new distribution capacity or new distribution systems need to be added to support those end-of-feeder systems. We're seeing in Xcel territory pretty high interconnection study fees for a system larger than 10 kilowatts, soon to be larger than 25 kilowatts. I think the interconnection study fee, Rick, is $1,000. Just for an engineer, to pay for an engineer to study the impacts of a system that's probably not going to backfeed into the grid. It's probably not even going to offset the demand on site.
Who requires that?
Xcel Energy, pursuant to regulation, regulatory authority, but it's the utility that's asking for it. They're looking, in my opinion, again, hopefully the camera doesn't catch this. In my opinion, the utility is looking to recoup revenue wherever they can. Because not only can they not capture the benefit of solar generation on your roof, in their opinion, it imposes extra costs that have to be borne by someone. And so these study fees are just one of many embedded fees in a growing list of fees. On a national level, we're seeing state renewable energy standard attacks. Have you heard of the group ALEC, funded by the Koch brothers? All right, so you're probably all way more up to speed on that than I am. They lodged attacks, concerted attacks on renewable energy standards in states across the country. And I believe they failed in almost all, if not every single one of those.
I think they won in Oklahoma.
They won in Oklahoma, all right. They failed everywhere else. They failed in Colorado.
Yay.
They did. They tried to overturn the Colorado Renewable Energy Standard on the basis that it violated the Dormant Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution. They lost. Thank God. These are the desperate efforts of those who either don't believe in climate change or want to see the incumbent conventional business model succeed into the future. They're just fighting the inevitable. This will happen. Lastly, but not least, the EPA carbon rules will make the future, will bring about the future much faster. There's virtually no way new coal can be constructed, and any incumbent coal facilities will have to get on a plan to be retired or decommissioned faster than before. Oh, and by the way, I'm not a well enough known person for Bill Ritter to be here tonight, but you should know that the EPA carbon rules were based in large part on the model climate policy and energy policy that Colorado adopted through its amendment process and through Ritter's administration. They looked very closely at what we did here in Colorado and said, this is a model for national success. So you've got a huge asset with Jeff Ling and Bill Ritter several miles away. A few other trends, and these are getting slightly more technical but have a lot of promise. We're starting to see some promise around a financing tool called on-bill finance. So utilities are really nothing more than fancy capital banks. They take the risk of building an asset that will take 50 or 60 years to pay itself off and to be fully depreciated. And in exchange, the regulators give them a guaranteed rate of return for taking that risk, and we're the tenants who pay that back. They own the asset, they take the risk. The regulators, most often during meetings that we're not a part of, agree for a 50, 60-year payback on these assets, and we're left holding the bag. Dirty energy, central power plants, fights when you want to go solar. Well, there is an opportunity for good. They control the bill. They have a relationship with us, the ratepayer, that is sacred. And if we could turn their coal amortization into a place to finance solar and other distributed technologies, we could leverage their cost of capital and the security of their financing. Again, it's guaranteed, the regulators sign off on it, and we could finance systems on our electric bills. We can change the game. We can also give the utilities a rate of return for taking risk on all of us. That would be game-changing. Another really innovative financing tool that started and then has run into controversy and is now coming back online is called Property Assessed Clean Energy. This is a financing tool that allows you to take out a loan that is secured by your property, your real property. They get a tax lien on your property that stays with your property. It's not a home equity line, it's not a mortgage, it's a tax lien on your house. So it's the first thing to be paid back. It is the most secure, it is the highest level of security that you can obtain on real property, and that's being leveraged with municipal bond financing to offer really low cost capital for homeowners and businesses to go solar. Unfortunately, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae weren't so fond of the idea that people could buy solar systems and put their mortgage interests at risk, because a tax lien is here, a mortgage is here, and so the mortgage industry decided that it put them in jeopardy, and they wrote a really stern letter to the Department of HUD and said, we don't like this, you've got to stop it. And they did. They're starting to figure it out, and it's coming back online. In fact, it's coming online in a big way. Florida announced a $200 million PACE fund for renewable energy and energy efficiency. These are long-term payment schedules, high levels of security that are backstopped with municipal financing. So there's a loan loss reserve, which means there's money available. If you skip town and stop paying the bill, there's money left over to pay back the originators, the loan holders.
So Jason, did that get around the concerns of Fannie and Freddie?
There's been some accord reached. I don't know how official it is. So the city of Boulder, they maintained their commercial PACE program, but had to cease the residential PACE program. I'm told that could be coming back online here shortly. I believe that it's been worked out. New York, again, when they do this, they go big. $75 million energy improvement fund for PACE financing, and Connecticut doesn't really like to be in the shadows, has announced a $30 million